are a disability rights organization statewide. We serve people with any disability, physical, mental, emotional, developmental, just the whole gamut. Our organization started in 1979. There are independent living centers across the country, and there's a whole network of them. There is a national Council for Independent Living Centers as well. Most of our staff have significant disabilities, and one of the cornerstones of the independent living movement is that people with disabilities can help other people with disabilities through lived experience. We do have our contact information on the slide, and we'll go to the next slide.
I just want to say my name is actually pronounced Cara. Sorry, it's not something you can tell from the spelling or anything. So I want to emphasize this right here is a safe space. There's all kinds of taboos about like, oh, you can't ask people that, or, you know, am I going to say the wrong thing? Am I going to use the wrong words? Am I going to be offensive? Here, do not worry about it. Just ask it. And I guarantee we've been asked that and worse and more invasive questions, etc. So don't worry about it. We're happy to hear your questions. And if you don't ask them, if you don't have a place to ask them, how are you ever going to know? So please feel safe to speak up.
So we do have a question to start with, and we'll just do this with the raised hands if anybody's brave enough to do this. And so the first one is, do you actually know somebody with a significant disability? And first we'll start with those people who say yes, they do. So if you want to just raise your hand or stick a yes in the chat. Well, I see a few hands up. So the next question is, to answer to that is those who say no, I don't know anybody with a significant disability. And again, just a quick raise of hands. And finally, and actually it's kind of an important question, is how many of you people don't know whether you know somebody with a significant disability or not? And I think that's really important because chances are you may very well know somebody with a disability. It's just not an obvious one. It's not a visible disability. So there are all kinds of disabilities, and many of them are invisible, but they're significant disabilities nevertheless.
Mm-hmm.
And so following up with that is, have any of you met somebody with a disability or had some interaction with somebody with a disability and it made you uncomfortable? You didn't know what to do. You didn't know what to say. Any just quick hand raises around that question? Yes, that was a problem. Okay, well, hopefully we can make you feel more comfortable by the time you finish with this webinar.
Excuse me. So I'd like you to think about when you hear the word disabled, what is it? What is it that pops into your head? What are disabilities? Wheelchair users. I mean, in the picture here, we have somebody using a rollator, somebody who's blind, etc. What other things pop into your head when you think about that? And keep that in mind as we're going through this.
So there's actually a significant number of people have disabilities. 1 in 4 in the country have a disability. And one thing I'm going to do and just point out the reason I'm doing it, I'm going to read this slide. So if you're presenting, It's important for you to read a slide so you can make sure that people who have visual impairments are able to follow along. So 1 person in 4 have a disability. That's 61 million adults in the United States that live with a disability. It's about 1.7 million more disabled people since the beginning of COVID. Um, that's been a really big concern. And it's like 26% of the population. So those people who, said no, they don't know anybody with a disability, I wouldn't be surprised if maybe you do, and you just didn't know you know somebody with a disability. Um, they are very invisible, as I said, and um, you probably know somebody. There's a graphic here um, that it was found that long COVID is a disability. There's some disability symbols with a wheelchair user, a person who's doing interpreting, and somebody who has hearing issues. Um, so it's just this one, that being the 1 in the 4 people in this graphic.
Excuse me. So we'd like to talk a little bit about assumptions. And I mean, there are a lot of assumptions that we make when we don't have other information. And these are a lot of ones that I've run into. And I have to say that when I found that photo, I was like, okay, a little tongue in cheek here. I can't resist putting that up there. So one of the assumptions is every disability is the same, and people with the same diagnosis have the same problems and needs. Nope, not true. I know people who have exactly the same diagnoses as I do, and we couldn't be more different, just in terms of our needs. Another assumption, disabled people can't be independent and are kind of lazy. People have said this to me, so and if you're thinking that, at the very back of your mind, there's a reason that you're thinking that, and that's because that's the common narrative that we've been taught. And really, disabled people are often like the hardest workers that I know when we get the opportunity. Another assumption is that only people in wheelchairs are allowed to use wheelchair parking spots. If they're young or can stand up, they don't need it and are faking. This is a huge one and a huge problem. I can't even count the number of people I know who've had nasty notes left on their car saying, you're faking, why don't you, and et cetera, blank, blank, blank. Quote unquote wheelchair parking spots or accessible parking spots are for people who need them and who have their own legal placard or permit, and often they don't look like they have a disability. It could be cancer, it could be lung disease, it could be etc. So and I'll be the first to admit, as when I see somebody get out, I kind of go, wait a minute, are they, oh, there's the placard, okay. Okay, so another assumption is that real disabilities are always visible. Not true. And that, as Peter has said, and I want to also mention that there are a lot of people who on one day or part of one day will look completely fine and not like they have any issues. And then a few hours later or the next day, they're using a wheelchair. They're not faking. A lot of disabilities have that characteristic of changing needs. And people get really scared actually about using a wheelchair, and are people going to see me stand up and walk, and oh God, are they going to confront me, etc. So if you can keep that in mind, it's really helpful. Another assumption is that disabled people really just want special treatment. honestly, we just want to be able to have the same access and to have this, the same opportunities as other people. And uh, what I know some people who have this bumper sticker that says, with a wheelchair insignia, it says, "I'm just in it for the parking." Kind of tongue in cheek, but and then one more assumption is that people with disabilities always need help, so just help them. This gets really problematic. I can't even count the number of times I've been checking out at the grocery store and people see me and they go, "Oh," and they start like unloading my cart or like, like, "Oh, let me do this for you," and everything. And I'm like, "Please don't, don't. I'm capable of doing this myself," So just, as you would anybody, ask, "Hey, do you need a hand? Can I help you with that?" No? Cool, thanks. So just think about what you would want. And, we all want to be respected and our autonomy respected and I can't think of the right word, but supported, I guess. So,
So we talked a little bit about this, the equal treatment versus special treatment. There's a lot of movement right now. Well, there has been in the last several years in the disability community to remove the word special from a lot of disability related different organizations or activities like special education, because it creates this misunderstanding that all these people need something special. And what people with disabilities need is just equal treatment. Um, and that's why we have civil rights laws that make independent living more possible. And people can get accommodations that allow them equal access to the community. So it's just, we want to be able to do the same thing that everybody else does.
there we go. So we're going to talk a little bit about some specific types of or categories of disabilities. One is people using mobility devices. And I'll just say that I started out not using any mobility device, went to a cane, then a rollator, and now a wheelchair part-time and now a wheelchair full-time with a power drive. So here's some don'ts. Well, actually, let me start with it this way. Any mobility device, think of it as being part of the person's body. So if you wouldn't lean on somebody's legs who you don't know, if you wouldn't like put your arm around a total stranger, if you wouldn't like try to move their body someplace without without them saying, "Hey, could you help me move?" If you wouldn't like hang your jacket on somebody's head, if you wouldn't touch somebody in very personal places without asking, though, anything like that, the same thing goes for the mobility device. It's it's hard to explain that it feels very invasive, but it's also that mobility devices, especially wheelchairs, you have no idea how incredibly expensive they are and difficult to get. So they're like gold to us, and they're our freedom. So just, think about if this was somebody's body that I didn't know, how, would I do this? Okay, maybe not. So I hope that helps. Communicating with a person who is deaf. Number one thing, and in a past life, I was an American Sign Language English interpreter, so I've heard deaf folks talk about this. Usually the first people first thing people will say is, "Oh, you're deaf. Can you read lips?" And then they just go on. Don't assume that. There are some deaf folks who are incredibly, amazingly adept at what I call speech reading, and there's some who are like, "Nope, don't understand anything." And if you think about this, we say lip reading, but it's really speech reading. It's only 26% of speech is visible on your lips. And if you think about, you take a sentence and you only leave 26% of the words in that sentence, what does the sentence actually mean? So you're basically, you're asking somebody to you know kind of try to read your mind. And another thing is, if the person is okay with trying to communicate that way, make sure that they are looking at you and that they can see your face before speaking. Make sure there's, if in a restaurant, like there's often like barriers in a table, and make sure that you're not in a dark place where they can't see clearly. And also, really important is just follow the deaf person's lead on how they want to communicate. If they prefer pen and paper, if they prefer speech to text on your phone, however, or if they say, I need an interpreter, because this is a serious thing, or, more involved, follow their lead on that.
So people who are blind, communicating with them, first of all, don't yell. They can probably hear unless they also have a hearing impairment, as I do. But I do wear hearing aids, which give me pretty good hearing. And just like the wheelchair, the person's cane is an extension of their body. Their dog guide is an extension of their body. So you don't want to interfere with that. They may ask to be led by grasping lightly on your elbow. This is typically how blind people are taught. And when actually I've done some trainings for drivers who drive people with disabilities, because they can't drive. And so we train them on how to guide somebody who's blind by putting their elbow forth and explaining to them the different techniques in terms of if you're going through a narrow passage or a wide passage or those kinds of things. But again, just like with the deaf person, um, you know, take their lead on it, and don't assume, somebody's needing help. If you see somebody with a cane crossing the street, don't grab their arm and drag them across the street. They're perfectly capable. You can ask them, do you need help? And then if they say no, then that's fine. If they do, you could certainly ask how to help them.
Oops. Sorry.
There are people who have lots of different kind of mental health issues. Um, they're generally the best experts at how to be communicating with them and what they need. Ask before you're assuming anything. Um, everybody's situation is unique to them. Um, so it's important not that you make assumptions on other people you may have interacted with or other things you've heard about people with cognitive disabilities or mental health diagnosis. Um, they may need more time to communicate, in that it just may take them longer to process what you're saying. Um, so if they look confused, slow down, um, ask for feedback. Did you understand what I was saying, or do I need to explain that in a different way? This could be very showing somebody that you're not trying to just rush through and push them along, but you're really wanting the opportunity to engage with that person. Again, ask if they need help and how best you can assist them.
So, service animals. Uh, one of my favorite topics. So a service animal, there's a very specific definition, which is that a service animal is a dog, and it's been really clarified. Dogs are service animals, and there's occasional exception of a miniature horse, but that's pretty rare. And that the dog has been individually trained to do work or perform tasks for the person with a disability. The task must be directly related to the person's disability. So in essence, the dog has been trained to do something in response to a cue, either a deliberate, excuse me, either a deliberate or environmental cue or cue from the person's body. And just she, if you can see this little one who's on standing on my chest here, this is Kaya. She is my service dog, and her Instagram is down there if you want to follow her. As far as like on trails and that sort of thing, we really encourage having signage that all dogs must be under their handler's control at all times. And that may mean a leash. Usually it should mean a leash, but it goes beyond that. That actually I've talked with other service dog handlers that I know, and the feedback I got is often the dogs that are on leashes are the biggest problem because the owner's just like, oh, he's on a leash. Okay, he can do whatever he wants now. And this can be a huge problem. I can't even count the number of dogs that I know of who have been killed, who have been incredibly traumatized, injured by being attacked by a pet dog. So we are extremely protective of our dogs, because the amount of work, time, money, blood, sweat, tears that goes into training a service animal is astronomical. So I really want to emphasize this, that leashed and under control. And this is my favorite topic, so I can talk about service dogs for hours. If you want to know more, please contact me. Happy to talk with you, but I'll move on now. Okay. So in general, signage, if it's a no pet, like if it's a trail that's where pets are not allowed, it's important to recognize that service animals have a right to be there. That's called a public access space. And I actually just saw an argument about this on social media, that people are like, well, it's a dog, they can just go on any trail, like just stay away from the ones where people don't want to have animals. And the thing is generally service dog handlers will try to avoid other dogs because we don't know that dog. We don't know if it's aggressive. We don't know if it has a bite history. We don't know if it has any training at all. We avoid dog parks, etc. So a person may choose to go in an area where no pets are allowed, just for our own safety. Other signage is basically, take a look at the area that you're responsible for and think, okay, if I didn't know this place and I was looking for parking and I needed accessible parking, would I know where it is? If it's around back and there's no signage, I'll just assume, okay, there's no accessible parking, I guess I'll leave. and where restrooms are, etc. So just put yourself in that situation and think, how would I find this even? Could somebody who had never been here before easily find this? If not, you need signage.
So this is something we really talk a lot about a lot. Accessibility equals equity, and this may we hope this prompts potentially some questions that you may have that we hopefully can answer. But it's, what do people with disabilities look for to know they're able to fully participate? Um, and it's going to be different for different disabilities. You probably aren't going to satisfy every single disability because they're all very unique, but you do the best you can to get as broad a group of people as possible. Um, and then what are the ways to make people with disabilities feel welcome to your business? Do you have the proper signage? Um, when the person, you have an accessible entrance, you have a nice ramp, um, and you get through the door and there's a big display in front of you, you can barely maneuver around. Well, that's not particularly welcoming. um, and so this is where the equity comes in. I want to be able to get into this store just as this other people do. But I also think it's important to clarify here that um, there are some small stores, little mom and pop stores. I mean, they can be some specialty like boutique shops, and it may be um, unreasonable for them to have wheelchair spaces, aisle widths, 36 inch apart, so a wheelchair can maneuver there if it's a very small shop. But the shop owner should make an effort to be able to provide services to that person. Either um, one of the things that's promoted a lot of things benefits for people is to be able to shop online. It's a huge benefit for people who have all kinds of mobility devices. I don't drive, so I'm not driving to the store all the time um, to buy this or buy that. I can have it delivered right to my door, so that's a great thing. But if you have a business, um, have a sign up that says, uh, I'm, if you need assistance, please ask. I mean, it can be as simple as that. Um, and then, there are, I kind of mentioned it right there, is there are some challenges, problems in terms of things that you might be worried about that might happen when a disabled person, or group shows up. And if you've run into situations where have felt uncomfortable, as we asked in that beginning question, um, think about those and put those in the chat. We'll try to answer some of those.
Peter, if I can just add one
Sure,
thing.
sure.
Um, I think, a lot of times people feel like, geez, I don't know, I don't know that we're that accessible or, whatever, so I'm just not going to say anything. And this also happens a lot with events. And what I've learned through lots of experience is that if I am looking and trying to find information about accessibility and I can't find it, or I call and they say, oh yeah, you can call ahead and ask them about accessibility. I don't bother because I know they haven't thought about it, so it's not going to be accessible. So not saying anything is saying something very loudly. And even if you just say, we're doing our best, please contact us and we'll see what we can do to make things work for you. That's better than not saying anything at all.
So other accessibility things you want to think about, um, the ADA, mandates that people have access to information, goods, and services. So is your website accessible? There are specific standards for websites. Um, person who is blind can use a screen reader to read things on a screen, but if the website isn't set up for a screen reader, then it's useless to a person who's blind. But the standards make it very clear that the website should be designed so they are accessible to people who are blind. They also, you'll see on a lot of them, they have little icons which show letters in bigger text. So, and I use this a lot. I can change the text, either the color or the size, so I can see it much better. Right now, I'm actually using for me to see the slides. My screen is probably right now at 150%. And then when we switch this off, and looking at faces, I have to go back down to 100% or your head takes up the whole screen. But I use these tools so it makes it more comfortable for me to participate and be able to be active in what's going on. Consider QR codes. They can be helpful. If a person I mean, it doesn't have to be just, I mean, I think sometimes persons even with limited vision may be able to, use their smartphone to get to a QR code, or they might ask you to, use their phone to click on the QR code, and then it takes them to the website. But again, that needs to be an accessible website for them to access the same information that somebody else using that QR code can do. So it can really help in terms of signage, where you have a lot of information you need to share, but there's just, you don't have a sign that's 50 feet long, for somebody to read. So that's one way that QR codes can be helpful, but it's also can be helpful for, again, I mentioned people who have a difficult time processing things, so they can take their time to read using their phone, or even if they're not using speech to text, they can just take more time to read rather than having to stand and read a lot of detailed information that's only there in that form. So typically, it's best to use person first language. So this is a person who uses a wheelchair, it's a person with a cognitive disability, a person with a psychiatric disability, a person who is deaf, a person who has a visual disability, or a person who has blindness, a person who is hard of hearing, um, uh, because for most people, they don't see their disability as their whole person. But there is a lot of controversy about that, and some people um, see this very differently, and I'll let Cara share her perspective.
Yeah, so basically the two ways of thinking of this are person first language or identity first. And it's really interesting because personally, I prefer identity first language. I am disabled. And the reason for that is I have a lot of thoughts about why, but especially if somebody has had to fight for a long time to have their disability recognized, it feels really important to have that be right up front. And also, in saying that somebody is disabled or has a disability, it's recognizing not just the disability, but it's recognizing what it's like to live in a world that's not set up for disabilities when you have a disability, and that's inaccessible and environments, inaccessible world is really the biggest thing with disabilities. And so what I've seen is in communities with folks with chronic illness, especially that people tend to prefer identity first language. I think it's safest to start with person first language, but then also, follow the person's lead or ask them, how do you prefer that I identify you, because everybody's different. Some terms to avoid. And I I will say that none of us are perfect, and I know that I've used some terms even recently, and then I go, oh shoot, you know. Handicapped is really outdated, and it it refers back to a time where folks with disabilities were really kind of not treated well and had to basically beg to stay alive. Somebody who's slow, not a great way of thinking about it. Maybe somebody who needs more processing time or something like that. Psycho, okay, generally not very complimentary. Wheelchair bound, one of my favorites. I think if you asked almost any wheelchair user, I'm not bound to my wheelchair, but dang it, like my wheelchair, I call it my magic chariot because it enables me to do things that I couldn't do. So we're not bound to our wheelchair, we're wheelchair users. Dumb, crazy, retarded. I have a hard time even saying the word. The R word is what I usually say. These are really derogatory terms, and the R word it started out as a clinical term, but then it was weaponized and used against people. So try to think of ways of talking about things that are more respectful and ask. And if there's a certain word that you tend to rely on, like I tend to like, oh my God, that's nuts, that's crazy, that's psycho. I've been trying to substitute, wow, that's really wild, or something like that. And these are terms that are in the natural lexicon of, or not natural, but the lexicon of our country, of our state. And it's understandable that that's like the first thing that comes to mind. And if you use one of these, don't beat yourself up. Just kind of go, okay, wait, I gotta find other ways of doing that. So yeah. Uh,
So,
Peter, you want to say?
no, no, go ahead.
Okay. So in general, please do not touch wheelchair or assistive devices unless you're asked to and receive permission. And one thing I forgot to add in talking about mobility devices and wheelchairs, a big problem is where people are like, you know, waiting to cross the street or something, and somebody actually comes along and goes, oh, let me help you. And they just start pushing them in another direction. And people have actually been like kind of kidnapped and been injured because of that. And that's why I have fold down push handles on my wheelchair. So, don't grab somebody's cane, etc. Don't yell or speak loudly unless asked. And what I can say is, from the perspective of deaf folks, that when you do that, it actually distorts what they can see on your mouth. So it actually makes things worse. Don't grab a person with a disability. Basically, if you wouldn't grab a total stranger who you respect, don't grab the person with a disability. Respect personal space and autonomy. And I will say, as a wheelchair user, a lot of times I have a neck ache and a headache because I'm always looking up at people. So And I even have a visor that I wear because of the sun. So if there is an opportunity to like sit down next to the person, it puts you on an equal level. And really important is ignore service animals, like ignore. The general statement is no touch, no talk, no eye contact, no pictures. And what I will say is with Kaya, I used to like let her say hello to people that she knew. And I had to stop doing that because she's so social that she got really distracted and it was really hard to refocus her. So anytime you interact with a service animal without the permission of their handler, you could be putting that person's life at risk. So this isn't just like, I just don't want you to interact with my dog. This is a serious thing.
So the other thing is, and we've mentioned this before, but it's really important. If you've met a person who's blind, you've met one person who's blind. If you've met, you've met somebody who uses a wheelchair, you've met somebody who has low vision, you've met somebody who has hearing loss, but you've just met one person with each of those disabilities. You can't make the assumption that somebody else with low vision or hearing loss or somebody else using a wheelchair is going to have the same needs and wants and going to respond the same way. So you've met only one person with a disability when you meet that person with a disability. Somebody else might have the same diagnosis, but they're going to be completely different. So that's the key to this whole thing, is just
Yeah.
not to assume anything, because it can oftentimes lead to you being embarrassed or miscommunicating, and we just try to avoid that. So don't need to. I think we've made that pretty clear.
Oops, there we go. So, questions, comments, issues, concerns? I can't see the chat or anything, so.
Yeah.
Oh.
Cara, we have a couple that have come in. Joanne asked, you skipped over hearing impaired. Why is that perceived as negative?
Well, I think I can answer that. I mean, it is used a lot. I sometimes use it myself, but impaired tends to be a negative term, um, where a person with hearing loss is possibly less negative. So it's there's some subtleties there. Um, so it's if you can find a different word, great. It's not a cardinal sin if you use the word impaired, but look for a different word.
Can I jump in on that also? Is from what I know from the deaf community, the preferred words are deaf and hard of hearing. And I think still, but for a long time, deaf people do not identify as disabled. Deafness is a cultural difference, cultural and linguistic difference. So hearing impaired makes them go, what? I'm not impaired in any way. Like I function completely, so especially if you're talking with somebody who knows sign language, who is culturally deaf, hearing impaired is kind of considered a slur. Deaf, hard of hearing.
Next question.
This is a great time to think about any of the programming that you might want to do, whether you work in a state park, run a trail crew, uh, have plans to put in an accessible trail or make a trail more user-friendly to people of different abilities. And I have found Cara and Peter very safe. I've stuck my own foot in my mouth in front of Peter, and he's been so gracious to have a laugh with me, and I know immediately I've done it. So this is a really safe space. I can attest to that for asking some questions and sharing with the rest of the group your own experiences.
And if you think of other things after this webinar ends, we'll have our contact information at the end, and don't hesitate to reach out to either one of us to answer other questions that may come up.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'd love to I'd love to share just a story. Kelly Brush last year at our conference discussed a lot of places that she went that said were accessible. And then she'd get there and there was the challenge of getting to the accessible ski slope or the accessible beach. Not everything was as accessible as had been planned. And she gave a great example as well of dropping her kids off at camp, and the camp was set up to be in the woods, and it was all arranged that a camp counselor would come down and meet her and her kids at the parking lot and then bring them up to the space. And upon reflection and discussion, it was like, well, then those kids feel like they're a little bit separate from the group and have to have a special accommodation, when maybe it was possible to start the camp all together with the other kids close to the parking lot. I wonder if you can just speak to some of the ways that we as trail managers and program developers can think about the range of experiences that are out there and the whole experience, not just the trail or not just a program, but everything that comes before and after it, and how we might be able to help make things feel better for people of all abilities.
And if you're, I mean, it would sort of be a question you could certainly reach out and ask us, but if you're trying to decide either from a programmatic standpoint, well, should I run the program this way or that way? And you're not sure, those are great questions that we can help you with. As well as, well, should the signage be over here or should I put it over there? Or, how close should the accessible parking space be to, the access to the trail and those kinds of things. We're happy to look at those questions and answer those.
And a question that came in about, can you recommend some language for inclusion and advertising a summer program that would help people with disabilities feel welcome? So I think that, and Kayla, maybe you want to elaborate on that question a little bit.
Yeah, and it was I also wanted to comment on this. In my experience, the best way to go about this is don't say this is accessible, because what the heck does that mean? And how much do you even know about accessibility? What I find the most helpful is giving specific descriptions. And there's actually an app that another disabled person shared with me that I was like, oh my God, it's called All Trails. And what I absolutely love about it is it gives a description of parking spaces are this close to here. Here's what the surfaces are, et cetera. And it's like, oh, I can really actually tell if I can go to this place or not. So the more information you give, the better. Don't try to make a decision yourself on, is this accessible for everybody? Give information. And I remember going to a conference where people were really irate because we had to walk back and forth between buildings. And some people were like, I can't do that. I would have brought my wheelchair. And as the organizers were thinking about it, they were like, oh, geez, how could we tell people what this is like? And it's like, if you just give the information to the person, then they can make the decision about how it will work for them and what they might need to bring in terms of equipment for accessibility for themselves. So information like that is really powerful.
The other thing that might not apply to trails so much, but it's a good example of helping people really feel included. This was actually at the Vermont History Center in Barre. They have a wonderfully accessible entrance. Right next to it are, probably a dozen stairs, concrete stairs going up to, a door to get in. And they want to make the accessible entrance actually the main entrance for everybody. And so, we talked about different ways to do that. Not that they want to actually, barricade the stairs, because that may be needed in an emergency. But so, instead of having the accessible sign where the elevator is, just have a sign that says "Entrance for All." To make everybody know that this is where everybody goes in.
And it's highly preferable to have the if you need a different route into the building, it's highly preferable to have it as close to the quote unquote regular entrance as possible. There are a lot of places that are like, oh, accessible entrance in the back, which ends up meaning that it's like between the trash cans and it's where they bring out the garbage. And it's like, got it. Gee, that's that tells me a lot. But disabled folks, we come with friends who are not disabled. So it's nice to be able to stay with your friends. And to be treated as a human. Yeah.
Yeah. One thing to think about along trails, if you haven't, accessible trails, one way to help with accessibility, people may be mobile, but they may have breathing issues, or they may have a lung problem, or maybe they're walking, but they're using a cane. Having benches along the way where people can sit and rest can also make that a much better experience. And also making sure people know about that when you're advertising the trail, because that's going to make a big difference of people deciding that, if it's a 3-mile trail or whatever, and they go, oh, I can't walk for 3 miles. But if they know they have places where they can rest, that's helpful.
Wonderful. We have time for one or two last questions or comments from anybody. Feel free to hop in. Do you have anything you'd like to share? Questions you want to ask? Okay. Well, Cara and Peter, thank you so much for this wonderful conversation. I continue to learn a lot from you, and I'm very grateful for all of the work that you do through your jobs and through your volunteer work, and just being wonderful advocates and partners in our work. So thank you so much. We'll be continuing to unroll. We have 2 more webinars, so please feel free to check out the Trail Accessibility Hub web pages and the other work that we're doing. We've got 2 coming up next on April 2nd, Wednesday of next week. We'll be having one that will talk about how to help increase diversity, people with disabilities across all levels of an organization. So from board development to the leadership and people on the ground doing programming work. So please come and join us for that. And then later in the month, we'll be talking about assessments. If you could advance to the next slide, that'd be great. And we are unveiling our application for assessments for the coming year. So the Trail Accessibility Hub, as I mentioned, we are conducting 50 assessments statewide: aquatic, adaptive mountain bike, and pedestrian trails. And we have an application form on our website. So if you have a trail that you're interested in considering to increase its accessibility, that's a great way to learn from experts what you would need to do to make that trail more accessible. So please feel free to check that out. So that's it. That concludes our webinar for today. I'm really excited to see all of you here, and thank you so much for your participation. Hope you have a great day.